Oh jeez. Look, I'm a very optimistic guy, and I want this show to focus on good games. Games that are worth playing. But sometimes in order to appreciate the good, you get to look at the bad. Frontline was released by Taito in 1982, and before the days of crappy flash games and even crappier mobile games, this was about as bad as it got. The first thing you're likely to notice about this game is the graphics. More specifically, that the graphics look terrible. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not criticizing that the game looks old or outdated. An old game can still look amazing to this day, just as long as the developers knew how to use the technological limitations to their advantage. But on the flip side, if a game has poor art direction, then it will look terrible even with all the technology in the world backing it up. And the art direction is Frontline's problem. The environments are just kind of generic and boring, but the worst part by far is the characters. Even a kindergartner could draw more appealing characters than this. And if you took said drawing, taped it to a stick and just wobbled it around a bit, then you'd get more convincing animations as well. Also, remember that this game was not made by some newly started company. It was made by Taito, the same Taito who at this point had already created Space Invaders. You know, the game that had such iconic characters that they pretty much serve as the unofficial logo of the entire video game industry. But enough about the graphics for now. Let's talk about where the gameplay sucks too. Now it is true that this is one of the first games that let you move and shoot in different directions, but it's by no means the first. Nintendo's Sheriff, for instance, had already been out for several years, and during the same year that Frontline came out, Robotron 2084 was released, and that's the game that pretty much defined the entire twin-stick shooter genre. Still though, this game deserves at least some degree of respect, since it served as inspiration for future games such as Ikari Warriors. But that's about the kindest thing I have to say about it. Your little soldier, not a euphemism, comes equipped with a rifle and an unlimited supply of hand grenades, both of which can be fired in 8 directions. The rifle is your standard weapon, and it can fire a couple of shots at a time. The grenades on the other hand are much slower, but they can be thrown over obstacles, and unlike the rifle they can destroy enemy vehicles. The enemy soldiers come with the same equipment. In fact, they're just palette swaps of the player character with an evil X symbol and an eye patch stapled onto them. You can very easily tell this is the case, since the symbol and eye patch will frequently just glitch away from the enemy sprites. So the game is basically just a war against an army of clones of yourself. The only difference is that the enemies use hills and bushes for cover, and you can't of course. On top of this, the enemies are extremely aggressive, and obstacles like landmines, bushes and falling rocks are randomized each time you play, so you can't train to learn the level designs and how to avoid the enemies like in other games. These things combined makes the game really hard for all the wrong reasons, and it's definitely not helped by glitches such as sprites that actually scroll up with the camera when they're supposed to be stationary, which can be extremely distracting when you're trying to focus on all the chaos already going on the screen. When you reached about the halfway point of a level, the enemy soldiers will be replaced by heavily armed bumper cars, or tanks as the game might try to convince you they're supposed to be. You also get to drive a bumper car of your very own, which in theory should at least add some fun variety. Well, this is still Frontline, so no, it's not very fun. Playing with the tank/bumper car is almost exactly the same as when you're playing on foot, but at least it allows you to take one hit without dying, if you manage to get out before the tank explodes. But of course this game can't have a positive point without an equal negative one, and in this particular case that negative point is the long drawn out animation each time you jump in and out of the tanks. You see, you can still get hurt during this animation, so there's about a 50% chance that an enemy will sneak up and kill you each time you enter or exit the tanks, which kind of defeats the purpose. Oh yes, I forgot to talk about the sound. And guess what? It's really bad. Actually, bad might even be too generous. This game probably has the worst sound I've ever heard. It's so bad it makes those old Tiger LCD games sound like Mozart by comparison. It's just constant high-pitched screeching and beeping. When I was recording for this video, I actually had to take pauses every 15 minutes or so, because the sound was literally making me feel sick. Usually I am a huge fan of 80s arcade games, but Frontline is definitely an exception to that rule. I guess in some way all the things this game tried to do were ambitious for the time, but there's just nothing fun about it. If you for some reason want to play this game, you can get it on Taito Legends 2 for PC, PS2 or original Xbox. And there's also a fairly faithful port for the Famicom, which is actually a bit better than the arcade version if you ask me. So yeah, if you want to play it, it's actually pretty easy to find. Or, you could play some Robotron or Commando instead. Just saying.